Some of the most iconic physiques in the golden age of bodybuilding looked absolutely unbeatable in magazines. Massive arms, tiny waists, and perfect symmetry frozen in glossy pages. But time has a way of exposing what camera angles and peak week conditioning could hide. Structural weaknesses, extreme contest prep methods, brutal injuries, and the sheer cost of carrying that much mass all came due eventually. What looked immortal at 25 often looked unrecognizable at 50. In this video, you'll discover 14 legendary physiques that declined in ways that shocked even longtime fans. Some from injury, some from lifestyle choices, and some from methods so extreme they couldn't last. These aren't normal people aging normally. These are champions whose bodies paid a price most fans never saw coming. By the end, you'll see which champion shocked even the judges with how drastically his physique changed. And it's probably not who you think. Sergio Oliva. Sergio Oliva earned his nickname, The Myth, for a reason. His late 60s physique featured an impossibly small waist, flaring lats that seemed to defy anatomy, and round, full muscle bellies everywhere. 3 Mr. Olympia titles later, he'd set a standard that many still consider the greatest combination of size and shape ever achieved. His proportions looked almost drawn rather than built, the kind of structure that made other champions look ordinary by comparison. But comparing prime Sergio to photos from the 80s and 90s reveals one of the most dramatic visual declines in bodybuilding history. The tight waist disappeared, replaced by a thicker midsection development and loose skin that erased the taper he was famous for. His shoulders and arms, once perfectly balanced and round, showed clear signs of wear and injury that altered their shape and fullness. The crisp lines vanished entirely. What made this decline so shocking wasn't that he looked bad. It's that he looked nothing like the myth anymore. The contrast was brutal and undeniable. Years of heavy training, a long competitive career pushing extreme weights, and the simple reality of aging combined to dismantle what once seemed superhuman. His peak was so impossibly high that time could only drag it downward, and no amount of continued training could restore what made him legendary. Sergio remained huge and powerful well into his later years, but the magic was gone, and fans who remember 1968 couldn't help but notice how far the physique had fallen from that untouchable standard. Ferrigno. Lou Ferrigno became a household name through pumping iron and his role as the Incredible Hulk, and his sheer size made him unforgettable to an entire generation. At 6'5" with massive arms, a thick chest, and a wide back, he looked like bodybuilding's ultimate giant. The kind of physique that seemed like it would dominate forever simply through overwhelming scale. But maintaining that look across decades proved nearly impossible, especially for someone with such an extreme frame. His early 90s comeback attempt showed a much blockier physique, still large and impressive by normal standards, but missing the crisp shoulder-to-waist contrast and tight lines that made his younger self so visually striking. In non-competitive photos from later years, the loss of muscle density became obvious and harder to ignore. His midsection softened considerably. His chest and shoulders no longer carried the same overwhelming thickness, and his posture shifted in ways that revealed decades of accumulated joint stress and structural wear. Very tall frames are notoriously difficult to keep filled and sharp as testosterone levels and natural recovery capacity decline with age. Multiple comebacks meant repeated cycles of bulking up and cutting down, which stretched the skin and taxed the structure in ways that became more visible with each attempt. The giant who once dominated magazine covers and inspired millions had aged into someone who looked more like a retired athlete than a bodybuilding icon. It wasn't dramatic collapse or sudden deterioration. It was gradual erosion, the kind that's easy to miss year by year, but impossible to ignore when you compare the peaks to the valleys and realize how much was lost. Bertil Fox. Bertil Fox earned the nickname Brutal Bertil because his upper body thickness was genuinely terrifying in the 70s and 80s. His chest, arms, delts, and back were slabs of dense muscle that made him one of the most imposing figures on any stage he stepped on. When he hit a front double biceps, the sheer mass was almost frightening, the kind of development that made other pros look small by comparison. But Fox's physique aged in ways that went beyond normal muscle loss or the typical softening that happens with retirement. Post-competition photos show a man who lost not just size, but the entire structural foundation his look was built on, without that extreme thickness. His frame appeared smaller, softer, and far less imposing than anyone who remembered his prime could have imagined. Posture changes and visible aging added to decline in ways that made the contrast even more jarring. What made everything worse were the serious legal troubles that ended his public career and changed his life forever in the most tragic way possible. Limited training access, extreme stress, and years spent far from the bodybuilding world all contributed to a dramatically altered appearance that shocked those who tracked his story. The contrast between peak Bertel, thick, powerful, intimidating, and genuinely frightening on stage, and later Bertel was shocking to anyone who remembered the posters and magazine spreads. His physique didn't just shrink over time. It lost the very quality that defined it and made him memorable. This wasn't a case of aging gracefully or maintaining some version of the original look through smart training. It was a complete transformation and not in a positive direction, leaving fans who remember only the brutal thickness that once made him a legend. Mike Mentzer. Mike Mentzer's 1979 Mr. Olympia heavyweight victory showcased one of the sharpest, most conditioned physiques of the era. Thick chest, dense delts, and a level of detail that looked almost scientific in its precision. His advocacy of high-intensity training built an entire philosophy around precision, recovery, and maximizing results from minimal volume. He looked like the future of intelligent bodybuilding, and his physique backed up every word he said. But photos from the 90s tell a completely different story that's difficult to reconcile with the champion everyone remembered. Mentzer's appearance changed drastically. He became much smaller, his posture hunched and tired, and his overall look suggested someone worn down by life rather than someone who once embodied peak physical condition and mental discipline. His face aged heavily, showing stress and exhaustion, and the muscle that once defined him seemed to evaporate almost completely. Serious personal struggles, including well-documented mental health challenges and long periods away from structured training or regular work, clearly took their toll in ways that went beyond simple detraining. The low-volume training philosophy that helped him peak efficiently may not have provided enough consistent stimulus to maintain size during chaotic years when structure disappeared from his life. Normal aging combined with possible health issues meant the razor-sharp 1979 look was gone forever, never to return regardless of any attempts to recapture it. This wasn't just muscle loss or typical retirement softening. It was a complete physical transformation that left fans barely recognizing the man in later photos. His decline stands as a sobering reminder that intensity alone can't protect a physique when life itself becomes the heaviest weight to manage, and when the mental foundation crumbles, the physical one follows. Tom Platz. Tom Platz's legs were so legendary they earned him the nickname the Golden Eagle and became the most photographed lower body in bodybuilding history. Images that still circulate decades later. His quads featured insane separation, deep striations, and sweeping teardrops that seemed to defy biological limits. Every pose revealed detail that looked airbrushed even in person. But his upper body, while solid and functional, always lagged visibly behind his legendary lower body development. The imbalance was obvious even at his peak, but fans accepted it because the legs were just that spectacular. As Platz aged, this imbalance became more pronounced and increasingly harder to ignore or excuse. His legs retained much of their structural size and distinctive shape, but his upper body lost mass and thickness more quickly, creating an increasingly odd silhouette that became more jarring over time. Decades of ultra-high rep squats and extreme weights likely contributed to significant joint wear in his knees and hips, and these structural changes became visible in his movement and posture. In later photos, his thighs still looked impressively developed, but loose skin and the widening gap between leg and torso development made the overall physique appear unbalanced rather than freaky in a good way. What once seemed like an exciting specialization, legs so developed they dominated every pose and became his calling card, became a visual problem as age eroded the upper body more aggressively than the lower. The proportion gap that fans once celebrated as unique became a liability that made the aging process look worse. Platz's physique aged in a way that highlighted the dangers of extreme imbalance and over-specialization. Time revealed that building one body part to legendary status, while neglecting overall proportion, doesn't hold up when muscle density and skin tightness inevitably decline, leaving behind a structure that looks incomplete rather than impressive. Dorian Yates. Dorian Yates won 6 consecutive Mr. Olympia titles from 1992 to 1997, defining the 90s mass monster era with his grainy, dense conditioning and brutal back thickness that seemed carved from granite. His physique set a new standard for both size and detail, showing that mass and conditioning didn't have to be mutually exclusive. He trained with an intensity that bordered on frightening, and it showed in every striation and separation. But after retirement, the decline was dramatic in ways that shocked even his most dedicated fans. Yates deliberately downsized significantly, choosing health and longevity over maintaining extreme mass that required unsustainable methods to preserve. The injuries he accumulated during his reign, torn biceps, torn triceps, chronic joint problems in shoulders and elbows, left permanent structural changes that couldn't be reversed through any amount of rehab. His arms showed visible asymmetry from the tears. His shoulder lines altered noticeably, and the carved, intimidating look vanished entirely as he shed competitive body weight. For fans who remember 1993 Dorian at his absolute peak, the later version looked almost unrecognizable in comparison. Much smaller, leaner but nowhere near Olympia mass, and carrying visible scars and structural evidence of the battles his body fought to earn those 6 titles. What makes Yates' case particularly interesting is that this wasn't accidental decline or giving up. It was deliberate withdrawal from extreme size and a conscious decision to prioritize function and health. He paid back the debt of those Olympia years by letting the mass go entirely and accepting the structural damage as the permanent price of dominance. His physique aged terribly only when measured against his own brutal standard at his peak. Compared to normal aging for retired athletes, he actually did quite well and maintained good health. But bodybuilding fans don't compare champions to normal people. They compare champions to their own peaks, and by that unforgiving measure, the fall was steep and undeniable. Barry DeMay. Barry DeMay stood out in the 80s as one of the most aesthetically gifted bodybuilders Europe ever produced during an era rich with talented physiques. His symmetry, round delts, sweeping chest, and artistic posing made him look like a sculpture come to life, the kind of balanced development that seemed timeless. Fans expect his physique to age gracefully because beautiful structure, balanced proportions, and no extreme imbalances seem like the perfect recipe for long-term success. But that's not what happened, and the reality proved surprising. Shoulder injuries and long-term joint damage reduced his deltoid fullness and altered his shoulder line in ways that destroyed the very symmetry that defined his entire look. As muscle density declined with age and training intensity necessarily decreased, these structural limitations became impossible to hide or compensate for through posing. Older photos show arms and shoulders that don't remotely resemble his 80s silhouette. The roundness gone, the flow interrupted. The overall look narrower and softer in ways that erase his signature aesthetic. This is where the real shock comes in for anyone tracking classic physiques. DeMay's physique seemed built to last precisely because it avoided extremes. Classic lines, no freaky overdevelopment, just balanced muscle building and artistic presentation. But once his shoulders went, the key feature that made his upper body flow, the entire illusion cracked and fell apart. His story proves that even the most beautiful physiques can depend on fragile joints holding up under decades of stress, and when those joints fail or wear down, no amount of underlying proportion or natural symmetry can save the look or restore what's lost. He aged terribly not because of extreme methods, wild drug protocols, or insane imbalances, but because the key display muscles that made him special simply wore out from normal competitive use over time. Bob Paris. Here's the biggest twist in classic bodybuilding aging, and it's genuinely shocking. Bob Paris, widely considered one of the most naturally beautiful physiques of all time, experienced one of the most dramatic long-term visual declines, and he's the absolute last person fans expected to age poorly. His mid-80s shape featured perfect lines, a tiny waist, flowing quads, balanced chest and shoulders, and elegant posing that made him the embodiment of aesthetic bodybuilding at its finest. If any physique seemed destined to age gracefully and maintain at least some version of its glory, it was his. His structure was textbook, his proportions ideal, his presentation artistic. But after leaving hardcore competition and embracing a completely different lifestyle focused on other priorities, Paris lost a massive amount of muscle mass over the following years. His body fat levels normalized to healthy but non-competitive ranges, and the hyper-polished, stage-ready look vanished entirely as if it had never existed. To a normal observer, he looked like a healthy, normal man living a balanced life. But the bodybuilding fans who remembered his contest shape and those iconic 80s photos, the change was absolutely jarring. Much smaller limbs, an unremarkable frame, and no trace of the separation, detail, and flowing lines that once defined him as the ideal. This wasn't accidental decline or neglect. It was a deliberate choice to step away from extreme training, extreme diets, extreme discipline, and the entire bodybuilding lifestyle that had consumed his youth. His focus shifted to writing, activism, personal relationships, and creating a life beyond the stage. He aged terribly only if you judge strictly by bodybuilding photos and compare peak to present. As a human being making conscious choices about quality of life, he aged exactly how he chose and probably wouldn't change a thing. But visually, purely from a physique standpoint, the once ideal body became almost unrecognizable, proving that walking away from the sport completely erases even the most perfect structural foundation when you stop training for it. Andreas Münzer. Andreas Münzer's physique in the late 80s and early 90s was almost disturbing in its extremity, the kind of conditioning that made people uncomfortable even as they admired it. His conditioning was legendary and unmatched. Paper-thin skin, ultra-deep striations visible from across the room, and freak vascularity that looked more like anatomy charts than a living human being. His contest look was so extreme it seemed shocking even in photos, and in person it was reportedly even more jarring. But Münzer's physique never got the chance to age in any normal sense, or go through the typical decline most bodybuilders experience. The brutal methods he used to achieve that level of dryness and detail, methods that went far beyond what his peers were doing, came at a devastating cost to his health, contributing to serious complications that ended his life far too early. In the months and years leading up to that tragic end, you could see in photos a body pushed far beyond sustainable limits. Harsh dryness that looked dehydrating, visible strain in his face and posture, and an appearance that suggested suffering in physical stress rather than peak condition or vitality. His story is often cited as a warning about the dangers of extremes in bodybuilding, about pushing conditioning too far. Unlike most entries on this list where the issue is comparing peak photos to older age, the issue with Münzer wasn't how his physique looked at 50 or 60 years old. The problem was that the methods required to maintain that level of conditioning and dryness meant he never reached 50 or 60 at all. His physique aged terribly not through the normal passage of time and gradual decline, but through the immediate, severe toll of what it took to look that way even once, let alone repeatedly. His legacy remains a cautionary tale about how far is too far, about the point where aesthetic goals cross into genuinely dangerous territory that no trophy can justify. Chris Dickerson. Chris Dickerson won the 1982 Mr. Olympia with a refined, almost classical physique that stood out in an era beginning to emphasize mass, balanced lines, solid calves, elegant posing, and a level of polish and refinement that set him apart from thicker, blockier competitors. His look was about flow and presentation, rather than overwhelming size. He was already one of the older champions, even at his peak, competing successfully into his 40s, which made his eventual aging even more pronounced when it finally came. As he got older, the usual signs of aging hit particularly hard. Significant muscle shrinkage, loose skin that had once been tight over dense muscle, and postural changes that altered his entire silhouette in ways that couldn't be hidden through clever posing. What made Dickerson's decline particularly noticeable was that his physique depended heavily on flow and fine detail, rather than sheer mass. He wasn't a mass monster who could hide aging and muscle loss under layers of remaining size. His look was about refinement, separation, elegant lines, and the kind of detail that requires extremely tight skin and full muscle bellies. Once skin tightness and muscle detail faded with age, the contrast with his contest photos became stark and impossible to ignore. In later years, he looked like a man who had clearly once been in incredible shape and maintained an athletic build, but had lost the delicate qualities that made him a champion and set him apart on stage. His case illustrates how even a graceful, well-proportioned physique can age in visually harsh ways when you're comparing stage day perfection with perfect lighting, peak conditioning, and professional photography to old age reality. The same man, the same bone structure, the same genetics, but the etched detail and precise lines that won in the Olympia had evaporated completely. Dickerson aged like most humans do, which is to say naturally and inevitably, but bodybuilding fans don't judge by normal human standards and by championship standards that demand permanent peak condition. The decline was undeniable and impossible to miss. Franco Columbu. Franco Columbu was bodybuilding's ultimate hybrid athlete, a two-time Mr. Olympia who was also a legitimate strongman and powerlifter, competing at elite levels in multiple strength sports simultaneously. His short, massively thick frame featured a huge chest, dense back, thick arms, and strength that seemed almost superhuman for his size. He could deadlift and squat weights that giants struggled with, all while maintaining competition-level conditioning. But being both a strongman and a bodybuilder came with a serious cost that accumulated over decades. A strongman accident in the 70s involving a refrigerator-carrying stunt during a competition caused significant back damage that never fully healed. Years of heavy squats, deadlifts, and odd lifts like car walks and weight carries compounded the wear on his spine and joints in ways that competitive bodybuilding alone wouldn't have caused. As Columbu aged, spinal and structural issues became increasingly obvious in his appearance and movement. His posture changed noticeably. Asymmetry developed in his torso, and the thick, powerful body that won 2 Olympia titles looked compressed and altered by time and accumulated injury. He stayed in relatively good general shape and continued training consistently well into his later years, but his lines and structure were clearly affected in ways that altered his silhouette. You could see it in his gait, his torso positioning, and the way his body carried itself differently than in his prime years. Franco's decline wasn't about losing muscle or getting soft through neglect. It was about structural damage accumulating across decades of punishment from multiple extreme sports. His story shows that the sheer toughness and extreme strength that won championships also carved into his frame permanently, leaving marks that no amount of continued training could erase. He aged while still looking strong and maintaining muscle, but the cost of being a dual-threat athlete was written all over his body in ways that couldn't be hidden through posing or clever photography. Samir Banout. Samir Banout won the 1983 Mr. Olympia with a physique that featured great back detail, solid symmetry, and an aesthetic look that stood out in the early 80s when mass was beginning to dominate the sport. His nickname, the Lion of Lebanon, reflected both his origins and his fierce competitive spirit on stage. But his physique aged through a series of frustrating comebacks that never recaptured the magic of that single perfect year. Over time, Banout lost the fullness and flow that defined his Olympia-winning look, and despite multiple serious attempts, he couldn't get it back. His repeated attempts to regain size and compete again at the highest level resulted in a physique that came in either flat and depleted from harsh dieting, or overfilled but lacking the crisp, tight look that made 1983 special. Photos across the decades show a man struggling desperately to recapture something that was clearly gone, segments of looking small and deflated, then big but soft and watery, but never again sharp, complete, and firing on all cylinders simultaneously. Natural aging, structural wear from a long competitive career spanning multiple decades, and the changing standards of sport that kept moving toward more extreme mass all worked against him. Unlike some physiques that collapsed suddenly or changed dramatically in a short period, Banout's faded in frustrating stages over many years. Each comeback showed a little less of the 1983 magic that made him champion, and each attempt made it more obvious that his body had paid the price of chasing that one perfect year when everything came together. By the time the sport moved on entirely to a different standard and newer competitors dominated, his physique bore the visible marks of too many brutal prep cycles and too many years spent trying desperately to turn back time. His decline wasn't dramatic or shocking in a single moment. It was slow erosion visible across comeback after comeback, which somehow made it even harder to watch for fans who remembered what he'd achieved. Gunter Schleierkamp. Gunter Schleierkamp was an early 2000s fan favorite, a massive, friendly giant with a heroic look, enormous size, and the rare ability to upset top names in major showings despite not having a complete package of the very elite. His appeal was built entirely on being big, full, and impressively massive on stage, with a personality that made him beloved at expos and guest posings. But after stepping away from serious competition and the extreme lifestyle required to maintain that size, Schleierkamp lost a shocking amount of body weight and muscle mass. His midsection and skin loosened dramatically, and he overall looked softened to the point where he became almost unrecognizable compared to his contest photos that fans had saved and shared. Because his entire identity as a bodybuilder was tied to big, full muscle bellies, extreme mass, and impressive stage weight, losing that fullness made the later look feel like a completely different person inhabiting the same name. Fans who knew only the stage version, the guy who looked like a superhero next to normal people, were genuinely shocked when they saw him years later at a fraction of his competitive size. This was deliberate downsizing, not accidental neglect, a conscious choice to reduce the extreme training volume, extreme eating, extreme chemical support, and extreme lifestyle that built the giant in the first place. Age-related hormonal and muscle changes accelerated the loss once the artificial support was removed, and once the off-season mass dropped away, structural limitations and loose skin became impossible to ignore or hide. Schleierkamp's decline is a textbook example of what happens when physique is built almost entirely on temporary extremes rather than a sustainable base. Once those extremes stop, the body deflates fast, often faster than anyone expects. He went from looking like a superhero at expos and guest appearances to looking like a normal-sized person in regular clothes. And for fans who followed his career, that transformation was jarring, complete, and impossible to reconcile with the posters they remembered. Lee Priest built his reputation on extremes that made him both famous and controversial. Crazy arm size that looked cartoonish, insane off-season bulk followed by shredded contest conditioning, and a short but cartoonishly thick frame that looked almost unreal in person. His physique was exciting to fans precisely because it swung so dramatically between massive off-season size, where he ballooned up significantly, and razor-sharp stage conditioning where veins and striations appeared everywhere. But those extreme weight fluctuations, aggressive bulks followed by brutal, rapid cuts, took a serious toll over time that accumulated with each cycle. Skin looseness, midsection changes that showed stretch marks and altered structure, and visible facial aging all resulted from decades of yo-yo dieting that put his body through repeated expansion and contraction cycles. After fully stepping away from competitive bodybuilding and the pressures of maintaining extreme condition, Priest retained some muscle and a clearly trained appearance, but none of the tightness, crazy fullness, or conditioning that made him famous and earned him his reputation. Tattoos covering large portions of his body and lifestyle changes also transformed his overall appearance significantly, making the contrast with his peak years even more dramatic for anyone comparing photos. His case is a textbook example of how exciting extreme off-season versus contest swings can look when you're 25 and your body can handle the stress, and how rough and damaging they look 20 years later when the accumulated damage becomes impossible to hide. The body can only handle so many massive expansions and contractions before the skin, metabolism, hormonal system, and underlying structures start showing permanent damage that no amount of training can fix. Priest's physique aged terribly not because of one specific injury, one bad decision, or one extreme method, but because the entire approach was built on wild extremes and constant fluctuation that couldn't be sustained long-term. Time exposed what his fans didn't want to see: that a physique built on wild weight fluctuations and constant cycling eventually pays the price in ways that are impossible to reverse through any comeback or renewed dedication. Time reveals what trophies can't: balance, longevity, and the hidden cost of extremes that seemed worth it in the moment. The physique that shocked even the judges with how drastically it changed? Bob Paris. The one everyone expected to age like a Greek statue. The last person anyone imagined would experience such a dramatic visual transformation. Instead, his complete departure from the bodybuilding world and deliberate choice to abandon extreme training left fans staring at photos wondering if they were looking at the same person who once represented the aesthetic ideal. These 14 legends prove that peak condition is temporary, that structural damage accumulates silently over decades, and that the methods required to look superhuman on stage often guarantee you won't look that way for long afterward. They earned their place in history and deserve respect for what they achieved, but their bodies paid in ways most fans never considered while admiring the magazine photos. The price of glory is written in joints, skin, structure, and the years that follow the applause.